This is a bit of a mess, so I'll do my best to explain the situation clearly. I'm 23 years old, a full-time college student juggling classes, part-time work, and trying not to lose my mind in the process. I live in a tiny apartment, not glamorous, but it's my space and I take pride in paying for most of it myself. Life is stressful but manageable, until family drama decides to dropkick me in the face. For some background, my dad, who is 56, married my stepmom, Denise, about 6 years ago. I was 17 at the time, and while I wouldn't say it ruined our relationship, things definitely changed. Denise is fine, she's not evil, not wicked stepmother material, but we don't really click, if that makes sense. She's one of those overly cheerful, overly let's be a big happy family types, which I sometimes find exhausting. But I tried to keep things civil for my dad's sake. Denise has a daughter named Sarah, who is 30. Sarah and I have never been close, and I doubt we ever will be. She's polite to me and I'm polite to her, but that's where it ends. I barely know her, and it feels like she barely knows me. The main reason for that distance is we are just different people. Sarah is a mom of 3 kids, all under the age of 6, and her life revolves around her children. I get it, she's busy, her life is chaotic, and on top of that, she's a single mom. Her ex is completely out of the picture, so she's raising these kids alone. I can only imagine how hard that must be, but it doesn't mean I'm automatically signed up to help her. Now here's where the problem comes in. My dad and Denise have this weird assumption that because Sarah is my stepsister, and her kids are family, I'm somehow responsible for helping out. Translation: babysitting. It started small. Maybe a year or so after my dad remarried, Denise would call me up on short notice asking if I could help out and watch Sarah's kids. It was always framed as a family favor, something I should want to do. At first, I felt bad saying no. I didn't have the strongest boundaries back then, so I'd agree. It's just for a few hours, I'd tell myself. It's no big deal. And when I say I'm not a fan of babysitting, I mean it. It's exhausting. Sarah's kids are sweet, but they are a handful. 2 of them are toddlers, and the baby cries more than I thought was humanly possible. The chaos in that house is next level. But here's the thing, once you say yes a few times, people start to expect it. What started as small, occasional favors turned into constant last-minute requests. Hey, Sarah needs someone to watch the kids tomorrow. Can you swing by at 9 a.m.? Or worse, Sarah has a work emergency. Can you drop everything and help her out? They never asked if I was free, or if I was okay with it. They just assumed. For a while, I tried to be accommodating because, you know, family. But it reached a point where I was putting my own life on hold to watch kids I barely know. I had to skip study sessions, call in late to work, or cancel plans just to help out. It started to feel like I was being treated as a free, on-call babysitter. And what really got to me is that Sarah herself never seemed to appreciate it. She would drop the kids off and leave with barely a thanks. Denise would always be the one to ask, and my dad would give me these guilt trips about how important it is to be there for family. Now fast forward to last weekend, which was my breaking point. Sarah was invited to a wedding, an overnight wedding. She needed someone to watch her kids for a full 24 hours, and instead of asking me directly, Denise decided to volunteer me. She called me up a few days beforehand and started the conversation with, "Hey, I told Sarah you'd watch the kids this weekend since it's such short notice and you don't have anything going on." Excuse me? First of all, I did have something going on. I had a huge project due for one of my classes, and I had already blocked off my entire weekend to work on it. Second, even if I didn't have plans, it is not my job to spend a full day and night wrangling 3 small kids. I said no immediately. Denise didn't take it well. She tried the classic guilt trip method. "Oh, come on. It's just one night. Sarah never gets a break, she's doing her best as a single mom. You know how hard it is for her." I still said no. I told her I had my own responsibilities and couldn't drop everything to help Sarah. Denise sighed dramatically and said something about how I was making this harder than it needed to be. I held firm, and the conversation ended awkwardly. I thought that was the end of it. Nope. A couple of hours later, my dad called. I could tell he was already annoyed because he skipped the small talk and went straight into it. Why are you being selfish? Sarah needs help, and you're just sitting there doing nothing. Those kids are family, and you need to step up. I was honestly stunned. I told him I wasn't doing nothing, I had an important project due, and even if I didn't, I wasn't obligated to babysit just because we share some loose definition of family. That's when my dad said something that really stuck with me. He said, "We've helped you so much over the years, and this is how you repay us." I was confused. What help was he talking about? I cover my own rent, groceries, bills, everything except tuition. And while yes, my dad helps pay for my classes, that's something he chose to do because he wanted me to finish school without drowning in debt. It wasn't a trade-off. So I asked, "What have you done for me that I owe you for?" He got defensive. "We've given you so much love and support. And now you're acting ungrateful." I told him love and support should not come with strings attached, and it didn't entitle him to volunteer my time. He did not like that. He started yelling, telling me I was selfish and lazy, and that I needed to change my attitude. And then he dropped this gem. "If you keep acting like this, I'm going to stop paying for your tuition." I honestly didn't know how to respond. I was so angry, but I was also hurt. I have worked so hard to be independent. I pay for everything else in my life, and the one thing he helps me with is now being held over my head because I refuse to babysit. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. So now here I am, feeling stuck. I don't think I'm wrong for saying no. I don't think I owe anyone my time just because we're family. But at the same time, I can't afford to lose tuition help. I feel like my dad and Denise are trying to manipulate me into doing what they want, and it's unfair. Am I being selfish here? Am I missing something? Because right now, it feels like I'm being punished for having boundaries. Update 1. Well, Reddit, I did not expect my last post to blow up like it did. I guess I hit a nerve with a lot of people who have dealt with family overstepping boundaries. Buckle up, because things went from awkward family tension to full-blown dumpster fire real quick. Here's the sequel, and it's a wild ride. After my dad's lovely threat to stop paying for my tuition because I wouldn't babysit Sarah's kids, I did something I never thought I'd do. I calmly told him, "If you feel that way, maybe it's better if I stop taking your money altogether." There was a long pause on his end, like I just slapped him through the phone. Then he hung up without another word. Honestly, I didn't expect him to hang up. My heart was pounding, but I also felt this strange sense of calm. For the first time in a long time, I'd stood my ground, and I wasn't backing down. I knew what would come next: family guilt trips, texts, calls, probably some choice insults. What I didn't expect was how quickly things escalated. The next morning, my phone started blowing up. First up was Denise. Long paragraphs about how I was tearing the family apart, how I was being selfish, ungrateful, and didn't understand the concept of family duty. My favorite line was, "Sarah has no one else to lean on, and you've made her feel abandoned in her time of need." Oh, please. This isn't about Sarah feeling abandoned, it's about Denise and my dad needing to look like the perfect supportive parents to their precious older daughter. Then Sarah chimed in. She texted me directly, and I was honestly surprised. Like I said in my last post, Sarah and I aren't close. She's polite, I'm polite, and that's where it ends. But her text had this tone of quiet disappointment, like a teacher telling you they're not mad, just disappointed, which is honestly worse. She said something like, "I thought you cared about family. I don't ask for much, and I just needed one night. It's really sad that you couldn't step up when I needed you." Sarah didn't ask for much. Really? Because from where I'm standing, I've been helping out a whole lot for someone who never asked. I didn't respond to either of them. I knew anything I said would just get twisted into more fuel for their fire, so I left them on read. For a couple of days, things were quiet. I assumed my dad was giving me the silent treatment, which I was fine with. Then my mom called. My parents divorced when I was 10, and while my mom and I are close, she usually stays out of drama involving my dad. So when she called and said, "What's going on with your dad?" I heard some stuff from friends, I was floored. Apparently, Denise had been venting to mutual friends about how I was disrespectful and selfish, which made its way back to my mom. I groaned and gave her the full play-by-play. The babysitting, the guilt trips, my dad threatening to cut off tuition, everything. When I finished, my mom got really quiet. She let out this long, deep sigh, like she was debating whether or not to say something. And then she hit me with, "There's something you should know." Here's where everything unraveled. It turns out that my dad has been financially supporting Denise and Sarah for years. And not just the occasional favor here or there, but regular, significant amounts of money. Sarah struggled a lot after her ex left, and instead of helping her establish financial independence, my dad, and by extension, Denise, essentially became her safety net. This part didn't shock me too much. My dad has always had a savior complex. He loves being seen as the one who fixes things, the guy who swoops in to save the day. But then my mom dropped the bombshell. At one point, my dad dipped into my college fund, a fund that had been set up by both my parents after their divorce, to help Denise and Sarah out financially. My mom found out when she noticed the account balance was lower than it should have been. She confronted my dad, and he admitted he'd taken money out to help cover some of Sarah's bills. My mom was livid and told him in no uncertain terms that he needed to replace it. He promised he would. Spoiler alert, he never did. That money was supposed to be for my education. My mom had kept quiet about it because she didn't want to drag me into the drama at the time. She figured my dad would eventually replace the money, and I'd never have to know. Clearly, that didn't happen. I can't even describe how I felt hearing all of this. Angry? Absolutely. Hurt. More than I expected. I've worked my ass off for years to be independent. I pay for my rent, my bills, my groceries, all of it. My dad helps with tuition, yes, but now I find out he did so after taking money that was already mine to begin with. That wasn't help, it was him covering up his own bad choices. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Suddenly, all those guilt trips about family and stepping up made perfect sense. It's not about family at all. It's about control. My dad uses his money to make himself feel important, and when I refused to play along, he lost his mind. I realized he didn't threaten to cut me off because he actually needed to save that money, he did it because he wanted me to fall in line. I spent the rest of that day stewing. By the time the evening rolled around, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep taking tuition money from someone who thought they could hold it over my head. It wasn't worth the stress, the guilt, or the manipulation. I called my mom back and told her everything. She was incredibly supportive and said she'd help me figure out a way to finish school without relying on my dad. I might have to take out loans or pick up more hours at work, but I'd rather struggle on my own terms than owe him anything. Update 2. Reddit, I'm back again with another update. I never imagined I'd end up in this position, but after everything that happened, I knew I couldn't just let it slide. Confronting my dad was one of the hardest and most eye-opening experiences of my life. After my mom told me about the college fund situation, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt like a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years had finally come together. My dad's guilt trips, his constant lectures about family, and his over-the-top support for Denise and Sarah suddenly made so much more sense. It wasn't about love or duty, it was about covering up what he'd done. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I wrestled with whether or not to confront him. A part of me wanted to let it go, to just walk away and move on. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust. My dad had taken something that was meant for me and used it to support Denise and Sarah without even telling me. That betrayal cut deep, and I knew I wouldn't be able to move forward without addressing it. So, I decided to call him. I wanted to be calm and measured, I didn't want to give him any room to twist the situation into me being the emotional or selfish one. When he picked up, I started by asking a simple question: did you take money from my college fund to help Denise and Sarah? At first, he denied it. He acted confused, almost insulted that I would even suggest such a thing. But when I mentioned that my mom had shown me old statements, his tone shifted. There was a long pause, and then he admitted it. Hearing him say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. He tried to justify it, of course. He went on about how hard things had been for Denise and Sarah after Sarah's ex left, how they needed help to stay afloat, and how he didn't see any other option. He framed it like he'd been some kind of hero, swooping in to save the day. But all I could think about was the fact that he'd done it behind my back, without even considering how it might affect me. I told him I felt betrayed. That money wasn't his to give, it had been set aside for my future, and he had no right to take it. Instead of apologizing, he got defensive. He said I was blowing things out of proportion and that it wasn't a big deal because he'd always planned to replace the money. That made me even angrier. If he'd really planned to replace it, why hadn't he done so? Years had gone by, and not a single cent had been put back. Then I asked the question that had been nagging at me since my mom told me the truth: did Denise and Sarah know where the money came from? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They didn't know. They had no idea that the financial support they'd been receiving came at my expense. My dad had been playing the role of the generous provider, using my college fund to make himself look good. And now he was asking me to keep quiet about it. He begged me not to bring it up with them. He said it would cause unnecessary drama and hurt the family. But at that point, I was done. I realized I couldn't trust him anymore, not with my future, not with my boundaries, not with anything. The person I thought my dad was didn't exist. The man on the other end of the line was someone who would rather jeopardize his child's education than admit he couldn't afford to support his new wife and her daughter. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I felt numb, like the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully sunk in yet. But as the hours passed, that numbness gave way to clarity. I realized I couldn't keep letting my dad hold money over my head. Every dollar he gave me came with strings attached, and I couldn't live like that anymore. I had to take control of my own life, even if it meant struggling financially for a while. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my mom and told her I was cutting off financial help from my dad. She was incredibly supportive and said she'd help me figure out a plan. We talked about options, student loans, picking up more hours at work, even moving back home temporarily to save on rent. It wasn't ideal, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't keep letting my dad manipulate me with his money. After that, I blocked Denise and Sarah. I didn't want to deal with their guilt trips or their disappointment. They didn't know the full story, and honestly, I didn't care if they ever found out. My relationship with them had always been one-sided, with me giving and them taking. Cutting them off felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. Taking a step back from my dad's side of the family has been harder. Despite everything, he's still my dad, and part of me misses the relationship we used to have. But I know I can't go back, not until he takes responsibility for what he's done and shows that he respects me as an individual. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather have no relationship with him than one built on manipulation and broken trust. In the weeks since all of this happened, I've started to rebuild. I picked up extra hours at work and applied for some small scholarships to help cover tuition. It's not easy, and there are days when I feel overwhelmed, but I also feel free. For the first time in a long time, I'm living life on my own terms. No more guilt trips. No more obligations. Just me, taking control of my future. Update 3. Hey, Reddit. I'm back with yet another update, and this time, things took a turn I never could have seen coming. After I cut ties with my dad, Denise, and Sarah, I was doing my best to focus on my own life. I picked up extra shifts at work, started putting together scholarship applications, and honestly, I was starting to feel a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, there were no guilt trips, no sudden babysitting requests, and no lectures about family duty. It was just me, building my own life on my own terms. But of course, the peace didn't last long. About a week after I blocked Denise and Sarah, I got a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. It was one of Denise's relatives, let's call her Emily, who I'd only met a couple of times at family events. Her message started with an apology for all the drama, and said she didn't want to overstep, but she felt like I needed to know what was going on behind the scenes. Intrigued, and honestly, a little wary, I kept reading. What she said completely floored me. Apparently, Denise had been ranting about me to anyone who would listen. She painted me as the selfish, ungrateful stepdaughter who had turned her back on family, refusing to help a struggling single mom. The usual. I wasn't surprised. Denise had always been good at playing the victim when things didn't go her way. But then Emily dropped a bombshell. In one of Denise's rants, she let it slip that Sarah's dad wasn't the deadbeat we'd all been led to believe. For years, the story had been that Sarah's dad abandoned her and Denise when Sarah was little. Denise always made it sound like he was a classic deadbeat, unreliable, uninterested, and completely out of the picture. But according to Emily, that wasn't the whole truth. Sarah's dad hadn't abandoned them. In fact, he'd been trying to reconnect with Sarah for years, but Denise had kept him away. Apparently, he didn't want to support Denise financially, and that was enough for her to shut him out of Sarah's life. Denise had even gone as far as intercepting messages from him and telling Sarah that he didn't care about her. I couldn't believe what I was reading. On one hand, I wanted to stay out of it. This wasn't my battle to fight, and I'd already decided to cut ties with that side of the family. But on the other hand, Sarah deserved to know the truth. As much as her constant babysitting demands had driven me nuts, she wasn't the villain in this situation. She was as much a pawn in Denise's manipulations as I had been, maybe even more so. After sitting with it for a day, I decided to send Sarah a message. I kept it short and to the point, explaining what Emily had told me and saying that while I wasn't getting involved beyond this, I thought she deserved to know the truth. At first, she didn't respond, and I assumed she either didn't believe me or didn't want to deal with it. Fair enough, I'd done what I felt was right, and the ball was in her court. A few days later, though, I got a reply. Sarah said she didn't believe me at first but decided to do some digging just to be sure. What she found shocked her. Apparently, her dad had been reaching out over the years. She found old messages from him, messages that Denise had hidden from her. There were emails, letters, and even social media messages that Denise had either intercepted or deleted before Sarah could see them. He'd been trying to reconnect with Sarah since she was a teenager, but Denise had made sure it never happened. Sarah was furious. She felt betrayed, understandably so. For years, she'd believed this narrative that her dad didn't care about her, that he was just another absent father who'd walked away. And now she was realizing that her own mother had kept them apart out of spite and financial convenience. Sarah didn't go into detail about what she planned to do next, but it was clear her relationship with Denise was on shaky ground. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own feelings about the whole situation. On one hand, I felt a strange sense of validation. For years, I'd felt like something was off about Denise, like there was more to her story than she let on. But on the other hand, I felt sad. This wasn't just about me or Sarah. Denise's manipulations had hurt so many people, and now everything was unraveling. Part of me even felt a little guilty for being the one to light the match, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. As for my dad, he's tried to reach out a few times since all of this went down. He's sent a couple of emails and even left a voicemail, but I haven't responded. I'm not ready to talk to him yet. Every time I think about what he did, taking money from my college fund, lying about it, and then trying to guilt me into silence, it just reignites all the anger and hurt. I know I'll have to address it eventually, but for now, I need space. In the meantime, I'm focusing on myself. I've picked up extra shifts at work and applied for a few more scholarships to help cover tuition. It's not easy, but I feel proud knowing that I'm taking care of myself. For the first time in years, I'm not relying on anyone who thinks they have the right to control me. It's liberating, even if it's a little scary. Looking back, this whole situation has been a roller coaster. I've learned a lot about my family, about myself, and about the importance of boundaries. I've also learned that sometimes, walking away is the best thing you can do, for your own peace of mind and for your future. As for Denise and Sarah, I don't know where things will go from here. Last I heard, Sarah had started talking to her dad, and it seems like they're slowly building a relationship. I'm glad for her. She deserves to know the truth and to make her own decisions about who she wants in her life. Denise, on the other hand, is probably still complaining about me to anyone who will listen, but honestly, that's not my problem anymore. At the end of the day, I'm just grateful to finally be free from all the guilt and manipulation. It hasn't been easy, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. And that, Reddit, is worth everything. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride.